How do you understand the achievement gap in Harford County Public Schools or in your specific district? What are the causes and what can be done? How can they be addressed?
There are several different achievement gaps, so that would be the first part. The first achievement gap that most people tend to think of when they say achievement gap is the one, and the one that is most spoken of, is the one between white students and students of color. However, that is not the only achievement gap. There is also an achievement gap between students who are on farms, free and reduced meal plan, and students who are not. There is also an achievement gap between special ed and students who are not special ed. So it kind of depends on which achievement gap you're talking about. One way or the other, I personally believe more resources to give to the students who are achieving. You talk about equity a lot. Everybody has a different understanding of what equity means. Equity doesn't mean I'm giving you a hand up. It means I'm making it so that you're even with the other people. So again, we're back to, depending on which population you're talking about, the reason students who are on free and reduced meals, for example, would need to be in schools or need the assistance, because if you're hungry, you can't focus. I can tell you that from my own students. I work in a school that has, or the entire school has free breakfast. I work at a school that has a 71% farms rate, so I'm intimately familiar with what happens with that. If you're talking about special education, you're talking about students who need assistance, some more than others, and there are obviously variations on that spectrum, in what kind of assistance they need. Some need more intensive interventions, some need just a little bit of help with, hey, can you help me focus? Let's tap the table here and I can help you focus, and a teacher can do that. Some need somebody right there to kind of, I don't want to say hold their hand, but really keep them more focused and directed. When you're talking about the racial achievement gap, there's more to it, but there are a lot of studies out there and there are a lot of resources out there to impact that, and that really is having the great teachers that we have, giving them the resources that they need. Time is really key. I feel like I'm talking a little bit too much, so let me hand it off to someone else. But I could go on more if you want to talk about it later.
I like to work with problems that have answers, easy answers. This one doesn't. This one's above my pay scale. I'm not an educator. I understand the problem, and I will go with people like Rachel who understand it, and that's the way I would be voting, with people who have a lot more knowledge of the educational system and this problem on achievement gap than I have.
I do think that Rachel articulated very well what the achievement gaps are and the causes of them, well documented. Thank you, you made it very easy for the rest of us. I guess as far as what we need to see done about it, there needs to be priority placed on those, right? There's a lot of priorities, and I think we constantly talk about what are the most important priorities. It's got to be bringing those priorities to the top and funding them accordingly so that you can make changes. Otherwise, you're just going to keep saying more of the same.
Achievement gap. Again, you're correct. Rachel did.
Thank you. We all appreciate it.
But I have a, not different, but a, I guess an expanded thoughts, if you will, on the achievement gap. First of all, I don't think that there have been, again, we use the right terminology, but our actions don't necessarily follow what we say or the things that we've done. I think that first of all has to be a recognition that there's a problem. You gotta realize there's a problem before you can solve it. That's first thing. So whatever the achievement, whatever the definition of the achievement gap or the problem is, you gotta identify it first. Then there has to be a willingness to address it. Well, a lot of folks think that, again, remember I said I got into this because there were decisions made that impacted my community, and without any regards to how it impacted them. A lot of folks think that if you give everybody a shoe, then they should make it. They should be able to, if you give everybody the same thing, they should be able to accomplish the mission, do what they're supposed to do. That's not the way it works. What we should be doing is looking at giving people what they need to be successful. So not that everybody gets a shoe, we need to make sure that everybody gets a shoe that fits. So some communities may need more assistance than others. And so I think that there has been this reluctance to identify the cause and to say, well, we're going to give everybody a shoe. We're going to give everybody the same thing, and if you make it, you're making it. If you don't, you don't. That is a problem. It is a detriment to our community and a detriment to our society, because what we've done, what we're doing, is we're not engaging. I'm approaching Social Security age, and we have this fight about the money in Social Security. I look at this simple, like Al does. The more people you have working who are productive, who are working and paying into Social Security, the less money and resources that those of us who are working will have to contribute. So it just seems to me that what we want to do, we want to make as many people as successful as possible. And I just don't see that. I don't see that kind of thinking. Believe me, it's not just with the school system. It's a lot of other systems, but particularly with a system that can change folks' lives.
I have had personal, first-hand experience in working and dealing with achievement gaps. Pretty much my entire career has been devoted to children that live in high poverty communities, and that is one of the achievement gaps that we mentioned and talked about. What really concerns me is I see money being thrown at things without the forethought, without thinking about what do we want as the end product. I want children who are literate. I want a child who graduates from high school who's able to read beyond just a functional level. And that can be done, and I know it can be done. And it's not a matter of sometimes of spending a lot of money to do these things. First of all, you have to know your population. Data, we have so much data, it would choke my dogs. We have too much data. And the problem with data is it can be too easily manipulated to give you the picture that you want to paint, not the reality of what exists, okay? So let me say that first. The other thing is that there are so many resources already existing in our schools. This achievement gap begins before children come to school. So we need to look at this as a community issue, not just as a school issue. What can we do as a community to really get kids involved in learning and help parents to understand what they can do? There are resources. You've got the public library here. You've got so many churches and outreach groups and people that are already working at the preschool level to bring children into that literacy environment. But once they get to the school, what do we do? Because we're still seeing that gap. It's not going to take more money, people. It's going to take using the resources that you have and finding the best instructional strategies and the teachers who can teach in the right manner to each individual child. That's what it really takes. I'm speaking from personal, first-hand experience. And when I worked in central office, I was able to work with 73 of the 110 elementary schools in Baltimore County Public Schools in training teachers how to address the literacy issue and how to bring literacy to all children, special education, farms, regardless of race, color, religion. It can be done. And it doesn't take more money, it takes teacher training, and it takes a system-wide effort of continuity in programming. And that's one thing that's missing here in Harford County.
There's no question that the achievement gap is a very important issue, and it continues to be an issue in Harford County. To addressing the achievement gap. Intervention is very important at a young age, and if you look at my previous service on the Board of Education, I advocated very strongly for intervention at all times. And we need to support our teachers, we need to expend greater resources on such areas as counseling to address the achievement gap. And frankly, I don't think enough attention has been paid to the achievement gap over the past 4 years, so I'd like to do more in that area, because it is critical that Harford County address the achievement gap. So I also think that greater attention needs to be paid to the schools that are in the Title I, that are Title I schools, and along the Route 40 corridor in particular. And that impacts District D in particular. Aberdeen has, the city of Aberdeen is part of District D and has several schools that are Title I schools. And there are several schools that have problems with respect to the achievement gap. So there's no question that we need to address this issue and pay more attention to it. I want to thank Rachel for explaining in greater detail what the achievement gap is. I also think that it's important to have representation among all groups, and that's why I'm running for the Board of Ed. I'm not an educator, but it's important to also have representation on the Board of Ed from all different walks of life. And that's why we have a Board of Education that's elected. So thank you for bringing up this question. I just also want to acknowledge my daughter who's in the back, Nicole Caffey, just graduated. She knows what I'm sorry, I didn't mean to embarrass her.
You're in trouble, man. I won't stand this time. I think a lot that's been said already is relevant, but I think that this also provides me with an excellent opportunity to thank you all for holding this forum, and also for the work that you've done as advocates, and for being in our meetings, and for speaking out for specifically a number of issues, but specifically for this one. I'm of that age where I'm old enough to remember pretty much the entire scope of the war over civil rights from beginning to present day. There was a few years ago when a lot of people would have said from beginning to end. That is rather obviously not the case. And quite frankly, I never really believed it was. You know, achievement gaps do exist. Achievement gaps exist in very different places, in different aspects, as my colleague Ms. Gaudier pointed out. And it's also true that achievement gaps begin at home and often exist before the student even comes to school. This is something that we as a school system can address, that we should address, I differ with anybody who says it doesn't take resources, because spending time and effort on teacher training is a resource which does cost money, but it's worth the investment. I believe that there is a tendency in many communities, apropos my earlier remarks, to have a sense of complacency over these issues. That over time, when people don't talk about things like gaps like this, that the assumption is that the problem is solved. Well, the events of just about 9 months ago made it fairly evident that the problem is not solved at all, and that it comes back to us out of the mouths of babes. At the end of the day, though, and I think this is what we're all talking about, one of the things that this question goes right to the core of the role of public education in a community. And the thing that most people don't really understand about education in general is the fact that there is absolutely, that in most communities throughout the United States and in most countries throughout the world, there is absolutely nothing that reflects the core values of the community more than the way we educate our children.
So if an achievement gap is an issue, then that is something that we have to look in the mirror first, and then we have to address it.
Well, they've said a lot. So I'm just going to expand a little bit on it. Basically, we need to close the gap. But I have heard, I sat through many State Board of Education meetings in Baltimore City on how they're going to do that, and I've yet to see them do it. Our children are everything to each and every one of us in this room, and our grandchildren are everything to each and every one of us in this room. And if we don't start meeting the needs of our students and our children and our grandchildren, the gap is going to widen. And if we don't start figuring out how to help the home, begin in the home. I mean, we have little ones that come to school hungry, and we have little ones that leave school hungry because they're going to a home where there's no food, and sometimes there's no electricity. So how are you going to help them expand on their education once they get there? And we've got to find a way to do that, because we need to meet every child's needs in Harford County, not just a few.
So I'm going to preface my remarks by saying that since I'm running unopposed, I'm going to try to keep all my answers brief. This one probably briefer than most. I like a lot of what I have heard from down the table. I do believe that this is a serious problem, as I mentioned before. In terms of fixing it, it's a difficult problem. It's one that people have been trying to fix already for a while. I think it needs to be done by the broader community. Right? When you have kids basically coming to school who have just thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, less words exposed to them in their lifetime when they get to school, it's difficult to make up for that. So I would like us to, focus resources early. I don't think it's necessarily within the Board of Education's budget to do training or whatever for parents, for kids before they reach the school system, but I think that we can certainly advocate for the county to spend resources in that area. Thank you.
Alrighty. I agree with many of the things that my esteemed colleagues have said here along the way for the train of the microphone from all the way down there to down here. Rachel, you outlined the achievement gaps, and set it up for all of us to kind of speak from. I do think that in trying to address it, you're looking at really addressing it from the systemic level as well as the personal level. From a systemic perspective, obviously you're looking at, I think, training. You're looking at helping to give information to teachers on again, what is this particular child going through in my classroom. So you have data that talks about percentages, but again, when you get down to the individual level of a specific child, what is going on? What are they bringing from their home? What's impacting this gap? So I think it's important for the school system to be able to provide that training, that perspective, that understanding for teachers. So that's the responsibility, I think, of the Harford County Public Schools. The other piece is that school and home connection. I think there are certain schools where that's working very well. I think other schools could learn from that. But as folks have said all along here, that's that home environment, that family connection is certainly a contributing factor to the achievement gap. And it's a responsibility, I think, of the school system and those teachers that are able to excel and go that extra mile to figure out a way to make those connections. So it is done, I think, one child at a time, not looking at a huge data point and trying to bring that down. I think by addressing the issue one child at a time is how you go about doing that. And I think the last thing I'll mention is just, I really appreciated Al's remark that, in my position now, I work on a number of different teams, on a number of different very complicated issues. And it's important to know what you don't know, and it's important to know that you have experts on this board. You work as a group, you build these relationships, and you know how to address an issue. Rachel clearly understands the achievement gap, clearly would be a resource to go to as we're addressing an issue as a part of the board work. So I think that's an important point that you had brought up, so thanks.
Thank you all very much for a thorough treatment of that question.